Why did my tail wheel flip on its back when I landed? What made my tail wheel ground loop Tokyo Drift style into a full 180 on the ground? Ever asked these questions? We did at one point too. After gaining experience flying and eventually instructing in RC and full-scale tail wheels, we wanted to share some useful tips with our awesome community. In this video, we'll cover the basics of 3-point landings, wheel landings, and demo some advanced techniques and maneuvers to improve your stick and rudder skills with. For the purposes of this discussion, let's assume you understand the concepts of stable approaches and landing an airplane. Let's grease one on and start out by reviewing the ways to land a tail wheel. Tail wheels can be landed in two ways, a 3-point landing or a wheel landing. A 3-point landing has you landing on all 3 wheels at once, while a wheel landing has you landing on the 2 main gear first and then setting the tail down as you slow. Let's start with 3-point landings. These are flown in a lower energy state, stalled on touchdown, just like a tricycle gear. There's a key difference though. Say goodbye to that training wheel. You're now stuck flying a backward shopping cart with wings attached. Good luck with that. Welcome to the world of dynamic instability. So when does it make the most sense to utilize a 3-point? Short field landings. Since a 3-point has you touching down in a stalled position, you're in a much better and slower position to get the aircraft stopped as soon as possible. Using a 3-point is also preferred by some pilots because it guarantees you full tailwheel authority right at touchdown. Heck, there's even some tail wheels with massive props that prevent them from being able to do a wheel landing unless they feel like chewing their prop up. Now let's take a look at how to perform a 3-point. Assume the winds are calm for the following explanations. We will cover crosswind landings in a later video. For this example, we will start on final approach. Set up your approach path the same way you would with any airplane, stable and aiming the nose for the first third of the runway. As with any landing, you will come over the beginning of the runway, or threshold, and descend into ground effect, which is less than a wingspan height above the ground. Then, you'll ease your power out to full idle and gently apply a small amount of up elevator, aka back pressure, to arrest the plane's sink rate while flying parallel to the runway just above the surface. This is also referred to as the round out. This will allow any excess energy to dissipate as you hold it here. Once the plane begins to sink while the energy dissipates in ground effect, you are ready to begin your flare by gradually easing in more and more back pressure while holding a 3-point attitude. Keep it here until the plane settles onto the runway on all 3 wheels at once. Your elevator should be fully up upon touching down from your flare. Keep it fully up to plant your tail wheel on the ground. This will ensure proper tail wheel authority should an unexpected crosswind arise. Throughout this entire process, you should be also maintaining directional control with the rudder to keep your airplane on your paved or grassy centerline until the plane comes to a complete stop. That's all there is to it. As with any maneuver though, there are some common errors that are associated with performing them. For 3-point landings, the biggest common error is coming in too fast, which leads to over-flaring. This happens with tricycle gear aircraft as well, but with a tail wheel, it can be a bit dicier. Essentially, on final approach, you begin rounding out to set up for a flare and add too much back pressure when your wing isn't anywhere near a stall yet. This results in what folks refer to as a balloon. In other words, you end up 5 feet off the ground rather than inches while floating down the runway well beyond your desired touchdown point. If this happens, the best course of action is to simply go around. Any good baseball player would agree, swinging at a bad pitch is a bad idea. So is trying to land from a crappy approach. Don't do it. That's all we've got for the basic rundown on 3-point landings. Let's transition into the harder procedure, wheel landings. Wheel landings tend to be either loved or hated. In our experience, we believe those that despise them simply weren't given a thorough understanding of them initially. Rather, they were made to believe they are an unnecessary, risky way to land. We disagree. Let's start by reviewing when you'd find yourself wanting to do a wheel landing. In the full-scale world, many tailwheel pilots land in a wheel landing attitude so that the pilot can see where they are going. Many of these planes have poor forward visibility in a 3-point attitude. Think Lindbergh. Rest in peace, god of no forward visibility landings. Additionally, wheel landings are a good technique to use while landing in gusty or windy conditions. There's a big difference in how wind affects your hand while sticking it out of the window of a car at 60 miles an hour as opposed to 15 miles an hour. Same goes here. Greater control from a higher airspeed is the name of the game. The last 2 sets of rationale to wheel landings are our favorites of the pack. First, hydroplaning a stall plane on water towards a gravel bar. Who doesn't find that fun? Second, simply choosing to do wheel landings for the added challenge. Wheel landings require a lot more stick and rudder work, and you'll see your flying skills skyrocket the more you do them. Let's make our base to final turn and go over the basics of wheel landing in calm winds. As before, we began on an approach path, aiming the nose for the first third of the runway. Depending on the airplane, our approach speed for a wheel landing will generally be the same as it is for a 3-point landing. The difference is that as we come over the threshold to round out, we will keep our power in as needed, flying in a level flight attitude just above the runway. This is to ensure that our 2 main gear touch down at a flying speed. We want to fly the airplane's 2 main gear onto the runway, not stall it on all 3 at once. As we hold our wheel landing attitude just above the runway, close the gap and gently bring the plane towards Mother Earth. The split second that your main gear kiss the runway, gently apply some down elevator, aka forward pressure while fully bringing your throttle out. Be like those Madagascar penguins, minus, the brittle wooden landing gear.
The grab, just a little peck, a smooch like you're kissing your sister. I said kiss it!
Applying forward pressure ensures the airplane is firmly planted on the runway. The amount of forward pressure you will need to apply will vary from plane to plane, but you'll know it's right because the airplane will be in a level flight or even slightly nose-low attitude with the tail up. This is called flying the tail. In our experience, the touchdown aspect of wheel landings is where we see most folks struggle in the RC community. RC pilots generally aren't taught the concept of forward pressure on touchdown. In this phase of their wheel landings, they tend to end up ground looping or skipping off the runway in a crosswind because their two main gear aren't being pinned onto the ground with the required forward pressure. Think of it this way. This is the equivalent of trying to drive your rear-wheel drive car in the snow without putting sandbags in the trunk. Don't be that guy. Maintain directional control. Now that we're on the ground, the next step is to ensure you're keeping those main gear planted. Continue to hold forward pressure while constantly making adjustments with your rudder to track the center line. You'll need to add more and more forward pressure as your airspeed decays in order to maintain the wheel landing attitude. Eventually, you'll find that the tail begins to fall as you lose the required airspeed to fly it. The second you notice the tail is beginning to fall despite forward pressure input, begin to gently transition from applying forward pressure into applying full aft back pressure, aka up elevator. Just don't do this too quick or your tail will slam onto the ground like Steve-O slamming into a ceiling fan. Doing all of this smoothly comes with practice. Now we're onto the final phase of our wheel landing. Make sure to keep your elevator fully up to maintain ample tail wheel authority and directional control on the center line while dancing with the rudder until you've come to a complete stop. Alright, we know, there's a lot to wheel landings, and to a beginner pilot, it may feel like mastering them is the equivalent of learning a foreign language. With practice, you'll start greasing your landings while grinning ear to ear. Remember though, as with climbing a tree, the second you get too comfortable, you'll fall out. The same applies to landing a tail wheel. Always be thinking one branch ahead of the airplane until it comes to a complete stop. Let's tap into the common errors associated with performing these pesky wheel landings. The first common error is not applying forward pressure to plant the landing gear on touchdown, as we discussed earlier. The flip side of this is the opposite error, applying too much forward pressure. Ever flipped your tail wheel over on its back? On that note though, remember that some lighter and/or smaller RC planes tend to flip over pretty easily doing wheel landings on grass runways without even adding forward pressure. It's smartest to 3-point these smaller and lighter birds unless you're on the pavement. For the planes that aren't hummingbird sized, applying forward pressure is the correct procedure, even though it may seem a bit scary at first. Just start with less than you'd think you'd need and progress in more from there. The amount required will vary from plane to plane and depend on many factors. Being aware of all of this will prevent any unintentional front flips. Another common error is trying to force a wheel landing while flying too slow. If you begin your round out to hold a wheel landing attitude, but notice you are sinking tail low, you're too slow. You essentially have 3 options here. First, go around. Second, if you can identify being too slow before kissing the ground, there is another option. If you have runway to spare, you could add some power briefly to get your speed back up and get back into a wheel landing sight picture and attitude. Third, which is our favorite, is to simply convert your wheel landing into a 3-point by holding the plane off the ground until it settles on the runway in a 3-point attitude. While driving, you don't step on the gas and the brakes at the same time, right? So don't do the equivalent of that by forcing a wheel landing when you're too slow. If you do, it could cause a significant bounce, all while not having ample directional control. Having trouble nailing the proper speed to carry into your round out for a good wheel landing? Consider this learning technique. Do a normal approach and round out into a wheel landing attitude with power, but don't touch the runway. Hold the plane an inch off the ground the entire way down the runway, adjusting power as needed to hold the required airspeed for a wheel landing attitude. If the mains touch, no big deal, just get her back up and keep holding it right off the runway. This procedure will force you to see and feel what the proper wheel landing configuration should be flown like. The final common error with wheel landings is a technique that we have found to be risky in our experience, and generally tends to lead to ground loops. Flying the tail too long on rollout and not getting your tail wheel secured on the ground soon enough. Arguably, the safest time to lower the tail on rollout is right as you begin to run out of elevator authority to maintain a wheel landing attitude. Some people will gradually bring in full forward pressure on wheel landings and let the tail fall on its own. Think back to our hand out the window discussion though. By letting the tail fall on its own, they are allowing themselves to be in a condition where their rudder doesn't have ample control authority should an unexpected gust of crosswind occur, as an example. No one really likes ground loops. If you have enough airspeed to fly the tail, you have enough air over your rudder to give you directional control. Once the tail starts to fall though, so too does your rudder control authority. By quickly but gently getting the tail down right at the point where it begins to naturally fall, you will maintain proper directional control throughout your entire landing. That's it for a rundown on wheel landings and the common errors associated with them. Remember that while wheel landings are a difficult beast to approach at first, we truly believe that you'll become a much better pilot by mastering them, and you'll end up finding them pretty addictive. One final quick thing to note on tailwheel landings as a whole. When going to practice both 3-points and wheel landings, try and start by learning them on the grass first. Grass is spongier, minus the SquarePants, and absorbs your imperfections. It's much more forgiving. After mastering them on grass, move on to the pavement. Once you've got them mastered there, you'll be onward and upward. We hope you found this content informative and fun. Hopefully, we've motivated you to go out to the field and tackle some of these concepts. If you enjoyed this video, we've got to kiss the runway and ask you to go ahead and hit the like button. Or, if you want to ensure a quality 3-point touchdown, maybe even hit that subscribe button. We'll see you again next time with a new upload.